Hello and good morning. I wanted to share with you an insight that has been immensely helpful to me over just even the last couple of days. It's been evolving, and then yesterday it really came to a point in a particularly poignant discussion about intensity and void, this sort of spectrum that when we are unaware of the extremes and what we find at the extremes, we're in fear. And there's intensity on both extremes, but there's one that I wasn't aware of. See, I've always wanted to have more intensity. I was open to it. I was okay with it. And in this heart clearing journey, I'm okay with all this energy and this intensity coming into my heart, where I feel like in a lot of the work that I do with people, I'm trying to open them up to that and saying, it's okay, let the fire burn, let it burn out this past trauma, let it burn out any future tensions and energies. The heart is a harmonizing space. It's a harmonizing energy center that takes energy intensities and harmonizes them. And so part of my desire has been to actually experience more of the intense energies of this higher energy and love, and take it in and really explore what it's like to take some of the most intense energies into the heart space and harmonize it. And without realizing it, I was on one side of the spectrum, which is, the enjoyment and the pursuit of this intensity. And also realizing that as this intense person, that sometimes that can be it can be a little too intense for someone who wants to be a little bit more, who doesn't want to have as intense of a connection, or doesn't want to experience as intensive energies or emotions. And so they find themselves somewhere else on the spectrum that's a little bit less intense. It feels a little safer. Well, then there's this whole other side of the spectrum that I realized that I was kind of avoiding before, which is the void. So it's kind of funny. I was avoiding the void. And what does it mean to avoid the void? Well, it means that in seeking these intense experiences and these intense connections, if you suddenly find yourself alone or in the absence of these intense experiences and connections, you are unsettled. You feel like you have to stimulate yourself somehow, being busy or playing a game or going out and connecting again. So there's this sort of, again, avoidance of the void, and there's a lot of strategies that we might have for how we avoid a void. But there's also this fear around it, and I've seen that for myself, and I see that now in a lot of people, which is, I neither want to be alone and have the absence of connections and everything, because that's loneliness. That's a void that I want to avoid. And so there's kind of this built-in fear of imagining this void as being static, and you're going to get stuck there. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we all want to feel love, but the more intense it is, the scarier it can actually feel. And so higher energy intensity can actually be perceived as like an attack on the energy space, because attacks are intense energies, but attacks have different intentions, or attacks can be damaging, whereas love can be very healing, nurturing, supportive, but it also comes in like an intense energy. So here we have on the one side intense energy that can be very, very good for you and feel wonderful, but you're in avoidance of it because either A, it feels scary and it's intense, it can feel like an attack even though it's not, or B, you're scared because it feels so good that one day, and this is the case with me, is like, it feels really wonderful and good, but I know one day I might find myself in the void. Even if I do everything right, there's a potential that one of us can die before the other, and then I'm going to find myself in a void. So, better to not have it so intense that I could potentially lose it. And this was like a subconscious thing I was doing. Better to have some level of security with a lot of connections, maybe if they're not as intense or whatever, rather than have this intensity and potentially lose it and then find myself in the void. And I was also avoiding the void in other ways of whether it be in financial security, through connections, always having something to do, like a to-do list or a schedule. So there's lots of ways that we go about avoiding the void, and I feel like I set my intention at some point after I experienced a really significant breakup of a 4-year relationship about 2 years ago. I was like, that's it. My heart opened, and I was like, I'm not running from this. I'm going to run for the intensity. And I think in doing so, I discovered this amazing world of heart clearing and love and connections and everything else. But I also realized that I was filling a void in a way too, in going for this intensity and feeling this emotional intensity. And I realize now that it's the void that gives contrast to the intensity. If it wasn't for space, we wouldn't be able to see form. And if it wasn't for form, all we would see is space and nothingness. And so the two actually go together, and they're inevitable. The two extremes are inevitable. You have inevitable extremes of level 10 energy and intensity, and you have level 10 extremes of void and nothingness. And they're especially contrasted when you've had one and then go to the other. In other words, when you've gone from extreme intensity to where there's an absence of that intensity, it can feel like the void is even more pronounced. It can feel like a deeper valley. But it's just the contrast. In other words, the void is a nothingness. It's a ground zero. So it's not like you can fall below ground zero unless you're just in complete negative territory. Ground zero is ground zero, but when the peak is really, really high, it just feels like you're falling further to get to ground zero void. But ground zero void is always there. It's there right now. It's just that you might be experiencing some level of intensity in your life right now, so it doesn't feel, you aren't even aware that the ground is always there. But just as much as you can climb to a level 10 intensity and avoid the void for a long time, it's inevitable at some stage that we may find ourselves, even while we're still in relationships, we may find ourselves in the void. And the key is to not avoid the void and not be scared of the void and not go kicking and screaming on the way down to the void, because the void is there to give definition to the intensity, and it will allow us to appreciate the intense experiences of what it means to live. And then we're not afraid of the intensity either. We're not afraid of the climb because we realize the fall doesn't mean death. The fall simply means an opportunity to return to and contrast the intensity without it. And in that aloneness, in that loneliness, we can come to truly appreciate all the intensities that we've experienced in life. We can redefine ourselves, and we can prepare ourselves for the next climb, because nothing in nature stays in the form of a vacuum. And so rather than look at the void as like a place that you're going to get stuck in, I would rather look at it as a place that you're going to bounce from. And so you really just bounce in the void, because as soon as you hit the void, which is inevitable, we all eventually are going to hit the void, but as soon as you hit it, if you just relax, if you just surrender, you're going to hit that void and you're going to start bouncing back into intensity. And if you surrender and relax and allow yourself to go into intensity, there's a point where, yes, you're going to get into this peak intensity of connecting without thinking or blocking or not allowing it to happen because you're afraid of what? You're afraid of going down. When you eliminate the fears on both sides and you know that, yes, you can go to this peak intensity and you may bounce there too. Or you may ride that wave for a while and then you may come down. And you're not afraid of that. You bounce and you go back up and you come down, and that's life. And that's when you're not afraid of going to either extreme, then you've given yourself ultimate freedom to experience life at both ends of the contrast without fear. That's pretty powerful. That's what I wanted to share with you today. So meditate on that a little bit. Post any questions you might have, and embrace wherever you're at. Whether you're in an intense experience right now, just allow yourself into that even more. Or if you're going into the void, the scary void. Let go of that. You're just gonna go into it, and you're gonna find yourself in that space, and you can learn to appreciate it, and then you're gonna bounce right out of it. It's not gonna last very long. All right. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions or feedback. See you.